Hello, my name is David Cass. I am president of CISOs Connect, as well as a chief information security officer for most of my career. This is a CISOs Connect podcast. I'm joined today by Lizzy. And Lizzy, if you could introduce yourself, your background, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm Lizzy. I'm one of the co-founders of Teleskope, a data security company. Prior to that, I worked at Airbnb for over 5 years, where I built their internal data protection platform. Yep.
So, data security is kind of one of those problems that's been a headache for all of us. I kind of see it as the new asset management problem. We thought we were good at managing our assets, and now really with it being a cloud and SaaS world, how are you approaching this problem differently, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think the main problem people still have today is they just don't know where their data is going. They think they have an idea, but in reality, it's in 10x more places than you might think it was. But the way that we approach the problem is not only helping our customers understand where they have their sensitive data and who has access to it, but also helping them remediate, because people have petabytes of data nowadays and they can't keep doing that remediation manually anymore.
That's a great point. So I guess, with now, COVID kind of sped up the cloud adoption for everyone. So now we've really seen data sprawl. So how do you, what are the steps for even beginning to get control around this?
Yeah, so I guess the first things you need to do is, one, accurately classify your data. So figuring out where you're storing sensitive data without the noise of false positives. And also defining what is considered sensitive to you, because that's very different company to company. Once you have that info, then other insights such as, is the data still needed? Has anyone opened this file in the past X amount of time? Just so that you can start reducing your data footprint and reducing your risk, because you don't need to store data that is not being used. Then who has access to this data is something else that you need to know, because that also poses extra risks. And then once you have this full visibility and understanding, then you can start to take actions to reduce that risk.
So kind of going back to the beginning of the data classification, that's, I don't want to say the bane of everybody's existence, but it's kind of like, if you're a new startup and you're starting from the ground up and I'm going to exercise discipline, classify data from day one, that's usually easier. But I have never seen anybody do that before. How do you make, the discovery process easier or less painful?
Yeah, 100%. And even if you ask people to classify their own documents, they're just not going to do it. No one takes these extra steps to do things manually. I think you need automation. And so the way that we do it is we take all of your data. So you point us to your cloud or your third-party SaaS tools. We'll ingest the data in your environment so that the data never leaves. And then we'll classify the data automatically using small language models that we've trained and that we can tune specifically to you if you'd like that as well.
So when you deploy Teleskope, it's really, how do you get it to connect to everything? Because now it's kind of like, the new shadow IT is everything that I am, anybody's connecting to through my browser that I may or may not be aware of.
Yeah, so the first step is connecting to the systems that you're aware of, but then we can also connect your email to figuring out did someone sign up for ServiceNow without telling the company. We can connect through Okta to see whether there's other apps that you might be using that you haven't connected through Teleskope as well. Another thing that we could do is look at what websites people are going to, but we don't do that just yet, but that's a great idea.
So from a remediation point of view, how do you kind of, how do you help instead of making, I found all of this stuff now?
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we can help by doing the action either automatically or semi-automatically. One common use case is, let's say you're using ServiceNow or Zendesk. Customers will be posting very sensitive information that you don't necessarily need to have in ServiceNow or Zendesk. So as we scan through the tickets that get created and the comments generated by your users or your customer support reps, we'll flag if we found a credit card number or a passport image. And then once we have that insight, then we can help you redact those numbers automatically so that it doesn't live in the ticket anymore. And that's how we do it end to end, not just from saying, hey, you have credit cards in 100,000 tickets. We can help you redact it from 100,000 tickets without doing anything manually.
And I guess the next part of it is, how do you make it the whole continuous life cycle? Because I'm a former regulator and things like that. And lots of times you would see that people take a Band-Aid approach. They temporarily fix the problem because they know we're coming. But then 6 months later, when we come back, the problem is back again. So how do you kind of make it a continuous life cycle so it's not a fire drill?
So we're continuously scanning and doing those remediations. So we're not just doing a one-time scan. We're constantly scanning new data as it comes in. And what we try to do also is you can define who we should alert. Should we alert, let's say it's the customer support rep that made the mistake and added that sensitive information. We can message them on Slack or on email or on Teams to teach them also to not do these types of errors again. So kind of have that education on top of the remediation that happens automatically.
And then I guess could you talk a little bit more about the remediation of, how do you plan for it? Because if I'm in, one cloud and connected to like 50 different SaaS applications, how does it help me prioritize, or what do I do?
Yeah, so we'll surface those and we'll help you understand, okay, these are the highest risks, like risk systems. And then we'll surface like example policies you could turn on. So if we did find that you're storing 100,000 credit card numbers in ServiceNow, we'll surface a recommendation, hey, you should turn on this redaction policy, and give you recommendations of things that you can do. And then if you decide to turn it on, then that's when we would do the remediation automatically.
Okay, and then I guess, for when, Teleskope gets deployed at an organization, I guess how long is it before deployment to starting to see results?
Honestly, I would say even a week. So we can deploy in less than 2 hours, especially if we're working with a person who knows how to deploy on the customer side. And then after that, you see results get generated as soon as it starts scanning. But I would say a week to get meaningful representation of your data set.
Now, and I guess for CISOs, that you've been pretty much a career technologist. So for CISOs that are coming into the field, what things should they be thinking about as far as like best practices in this space?
Yeah, I think one is starting earlier versus later, which is a hard thing to do. But yeah, the earlier you start, the easier it is to think about, okay, these are the policies that we should enforce or should not enforce, just to get a grasp of what are the different risks that you're encountering, because every business is different. I would say that the second one is you need automation. You just can't keep doing these things manually. Like at Airbnb, before we built the platform, like we were sifting through data sets and manually classifying things, and that just doesn't scale and is very point in time, and no one likes to do that type of work. Yeah.
So does a policy engine help with the classification for going forward? Because one of the things is, we can all make a setting where I force you to classify documents, but outside of the government, that's the only place where I've been forced to do it because there's consequences if you don't that are immediate.
Yeah.
Most corporations, there's tends to be little consequences until all of a sudden your data is somewhere it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and like even at Airbnb, we did take that approach. Okay, now we classified this first set. Let's force all the other employees to do this, but no one will follow those instructions. They'll just forget and they'll just do what's easiest for their job, which I don't blame anyone. Everyone should do what's easiest for their job. That's why you need automated classification to happen in the background. And yeah, that's what we do.
So what made you kind of think that this, I guess, part of cybersecurity was really ripe for disruption?
Yeah, because I think if you talk to a lot of folks and you ask them about the tools that they've used, they all hate the tools. And I think that's when we realized, okay, we need to build a tool that actually alleviates and reduces the amount of work instead of causing more work on teams. And I think that's the reason why we decided to build in this particular space.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I guess, where do you see this trend going future-wise? Is it something that's going to hopefully get under control, or with, the advent of almost everything cloud or SaaS, is this going to continue to be a nightmare?
No, I think things are going to get more under control. I think tools are also going to start to consolidate between data security, posture management, DLP, data governance. I think it's all going to sit under one tool because it's trying to solve the same problem, in my opinion.
So, as we kind of wrap up, any other key takeaways that you would like to leave, the CISOs with, as far as what else they should be thinking about as they bring in these types of tools?
Yeah, I think one is test the tool on real data. Don't test it on fake, clean data, because those tools will easily work with a data set where the column name says SSN and it's dead digits. But as soon as you point it to data that's real in production, that's messy, that doesn't look super clear cut, I'd say definitely test with real looking like data.
And I guess from your deployments, as we kind of wrap up, has there been a percentage? It used to be when people would ask us about asset management,
Yeah.
you were considered good if you were like knew where, like if only 10% of your assets were accounted for. But I've been part of big organizations, so 10% in my case would be, you have 330,000 assets, and you're like, oh my God, what happened? So are people surprised by the time they, get your Telescope up and running of like, oh my God?
100%. So at first we asked them like, hey, where do you think you store PII? And then they give us this list of 15 tables. And then we scan their databases and we're like, you have 12,000 tables with PII. That's just for structured. And so people it's hard to tell because you don't know where that data is going, who's copying it, who's putting it somewhere else. So I think people just don't know, just think they know where their data is, but in reality, they just have no idea.
All right. Well, I mean, Lizzy, definitely, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And it sounds like you guys have a very innovative approach to this. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for having me.